Hey everybody, it's Ed. Real quick, I've got two brand new Patreon supporters I want to thank. Blake Parsons and Amanda Mansfield. Both Blake and Amanda signed up to support the podcast on a monthly basis through Patreon, and there are a lot of cool benefits that come with being a Patreon supporter. If you want to learn more about Patreon or any other ways to support the podcast, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Thank you very much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Pete McBride. Pete is an award-winning photographer and filmmaker whose work is regularly featured by National Geographic, Smithsonian, the Nature Conservancy, and other renowned institutions. His most recent book is titled Seeing Silence, The Beauty of the World's Most Quiet Places, and it features photographs and stories from more than 2 decades of his adventures on all 7 continents. Seeing Silence uses stunning imagery and engaging storytelling to highlight the importance of places free of man-made noise, and it educates the reader on how quickly silence is disappearing from the world. For more than 20 years, Pete's been using his skills as a storyteller to inspire action on a wide variety of conservation issues. He's highlighted the multitude of threats facing the Grand Canyon in both his documentary titled Into the Grand Canyon and his book called Grand Canyon Between River and Rim. He's also documented the West's ongoing water crisis by focusing on the myriad of challenges affecting the Colorado River basin, making the important but sometimes confusing topic of water in the West accessible to a broader audience. And now, with Seeing Silence, he's turned his focus to noise pollution and natural sounds, and I personally learned a lot from the book and this conversation. This is Pete's second appearance on the podcast, so if you'd like to learn more about his personal backstory and his adventures in the Grand Canyon, you can find a link to that conversation in the episode notes. And in this conversation, we go deep into Pete's new obsession with silence and natural sounds, and why noise pollution is such a critical conservation issue. We started out talking about Pete's expedition to South Georgia Island back in March of 2020, and how he had to make a hasty escape from the island when COVID descended on the world. We talk about his experience during COVID, and how the pandemic shifted his interest from the visual to the auditory. We talk about how artificial noise affects wildlife, why Pete feels a responsibility not to share wilderness locations on social media, how Pete's family keeps him grounded, the larger purpose that drives his professional work, and we also included some sounds that Pete recorded during his South Georgia Island expedition. It was great to chat with Pete again, and I'd encourage you to check out Seeing Silence. It's an excellent book. And be sure to check out the episode notes for a complete list of all the topics we discussed and links to everything. Big thanks to Pete for taking the time to chat, and thanks to you for listening. Hope you enjoy. I was thinking the way to start was make it all about me, obviously. But when I really knew the pandemic, that it was the real deal, when it really hit me back in, I guess it was March 2020, was when I saw the picture of you sitting on that airplane where you were the only person on the airplane. It was you and like 4 or 5 flight attendants and a completely empty plane. And I remember I took a screenshot of it and I sent it to my parents, who you've charmed my parents before. I was like, look at this. Like, look what is happening. So I was thinking maybe a good way to start is, where were you when the pandemic hit? Because I hadn't seen you since the pandemic.
Yeah. No, it's a good spot to start.
And it links into the book too.
It's kind of the birthplace of the book, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, man.
It's good to see you. So it's a great question, because I was in one of the quietest places on the planet, quiet defined by non-mechanical noise, not by void of sound.
Yeah.
I was on an island off the coast of Antarctica called South Georgia, which is like the Galapagos of Antarctica.
And that's the Shackleton Island.
Yeah,
down in
that's
there.
it. And I had just hiked the Shackleton route. Believe it or
really?
not, we'd retraced his steps. I mean, what they did is a whole other podcast. It's freaking unbelievable. So I was standing next to 200,000 king penguins.
Yeah.
Thinking like, wow, if this pandemic thing is really unfolding, like we've been hearing kind of bits and pieces over the radio, because we've crossed the Drake Passage, the Everest of ocean crossings, to get to this island in the middle of nowhere. We're the only humans for thousands of miles. I'm leading a trip for National Geographic. Lindblad, I'm giving talks, and we go through rough seas, and suddenly we make this island, and we're standing next to these penguins, and it's 200,000 of them, and it is the loudest quiet I've ever heard. Penguins identify their young through sound, not sight. Mm-hmm. And so they're all... beautiful chaos. And I'm thinking, wow, we've really nailed it. Like, if you're going to have a pandemic, it's horrible, but this is the place to be for it.
Sure.
You're outside, and like literally like 3 hours after we get back on the boat, we've just spent 3 days getting across the ocean through huge swells, getting over seasickness, all that. We get over the radio. They're like, you have to return because they're about to close all the ports.
And so, like, how many days out are you, or hours, days?
We're like 9 days out or 7 days out at this point.
Damn.
We went through the Falkland Islands and 3 days of open seas through rough swell to get to this amazing island in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
And all that's left there is like the remnants of old whaling shacks and so forth. And nature has come back. Mm-hmm. As they say, nature bats last. You know, the penguins have returned. And so we turn around like, wow, that's going to be like the longest trip to have one day, 72 hours or whatever it was, in this amazing place, and go right back through the Drake Passage. And we get to port, and they let us off after a lot of radio back and forth.
Yeah.
We're like one of the last ships to get in. And it's like planes, trains, and automobiles. Like, they had to get a special plane to get us back up to Brazil. I get to Brazil. I get on the ground. I immediately call the airline. I'm like, I want to be on the next flight, because I just saw everything's happening. I get on the next flight that's kind of half empty, and I get to Chicago, and it's a ghost town.
That is so weird.
There's nobody in the airport. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, and this is like pre-masking. Like, I don't have a mask even.
Nobody.
I'm like, what, should I be here? Like, I wish I was with the penguins still.
Yeah.
And it's creepy, and everyone's nervous and tense. And I walk through the airport. I'm like, what, can I touch things? All this stuff, you know, all the fears. And then I walk into my gate, and I hear over the radio, I'm like, passenger Mr. McBride, or please come to the counter, passenger McBride. And I'm looking around, it's like, is this a joke? There's nobody in the airport. And I go to my gate 78, and I walk to the counter, and the lady goes, congratulations, Pastor McBride. I'm like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I just want to go home.
Yeah, what's up? Please don't tell me the flight's canceled. Nope. You'll be the only passenger on this flight. Congratulations. And I'm like, what? Huh?
It was...
And so I get on the plane, and we start doing funny photos, and I'm like, this is really weird. Like, and then partway through, it's a fun sidebar if you have time.
Yeah, no, it's my podcast. We can talk.
So they're like, you want first class? I'm like, I guess it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to stretch out. And they're like being super cool.
Yeah.
And there's 2 flight attendants. And then partway through the flight, they're like, can we have some of the photos you took? I'm like, sure. Well, let's airdrop them.
Sure.
So I go to airdrop to them, and we become fast friends. And I see somebody else's airdrop show up. I'm like, is this your airdrop? They're like, no. And I'm like, well, who else has airdrop on this plane? We have a stowaway. So I just, for grins, I airdropped the picture of me hanging out with the stewardesses, making stupid faces and stuff. And like 10 seconds later, I got whoop, and here comes a picture of the pilots acting all goofy up in the front. So they held their regulation. They wouldn't open the door, but they're like, wish you could come join us and watch, but here's what we're doing.
Wow.
So it was really kind of random. And I ended up becoming friends with the pilot. I ended up on more flights with him later.
Oh, really?
It's sort of a wild story. I always see him on these certain flights out of Colorado. But that is where I realized that the world had shifted in a way that it actually had something I'd been probably resonating subconsciously for a long time, and that it had gone completely quiet.
Yeah.
And from mechanical noise again. I'm not talking like monastery quiet. I'm talking like just not hearing, backhoes and hammers and machines and cars and stereos and all the beeps of our phones and all that stuff.
Yep.
And I came home to where we're sitting here in Colorado, and I kind of hunkered in like everybody and worked my way through Netflix and whatnot. And I started being like, wow, I got to do something. My work dried up.
That's what I was going to ask is you've been on the road, in the air, on boats, whatever, for 20 plus years. How is that just for your brain? And you're very social, like you're very out, you talk about being the Tigger to Federico's Eeyore. And I was thinking about you. I'm not like a stalker or anything, but I was like, I wonder how Pete's doing with this. Cause everything, it seems that like everything that kind of had defined your life, good friendships, travel, a lot of energy, like shut down. So was it, and your family, like, we couldn't even be around family at that point early on. So how was that for you?
It was tough.
Yeah.
It was actually much harder. Normally I think like, I love to hide away in the backcountry or get away. And I sound like the old person that wants to, hide from the noise now, but I'm the guy that loves to like, rock out too and dance and so for a minute it was cool. And then I did one job where I went to New York during lockdown and was super careful and did all the
Is that where the photo in the books from?
Yeah, there's a photo in there of no traffic and
that's crazy.
On Fifth Avenue, and I walked like 50 miles to the city and was like, what has happened? This world is different. Yeah. They say it's the greatest period of quietude in recorded history. And we can get into some cool things on that. But on a personal level, it just, it was really tough. And I think I sort of lost my way, and like many, just sitting at home and FaceTiming and all that was fun for a bit, and then that gets old, and then you drink too much and that gets old, and start building bad habits. And I think I had like a real mental kind of health issue, elements of depression, or I was really like, wow, is my career done? Am I never going to do this again? And
because speaking was a huge part
I had some documentary films lined up, done, speaking tour done. And so family became critical. We kind of potted up with my family. Nice. And I have older parents, so we had to be super careful and figure it out the best we could. But I potted up, and then a few friends after a while, after months, we kind of potted with some friends in the valley here, and that helped.
Nice.
I had a rockin' 50th birthday with like 2 people. Not like the Rolling Stones. It wasn't like Mick Jagger and me. It was like just like nothing. But I think like many people, like I think of all the kids in school and everybody, and I have nieces and nephew, and it really played out on so many fronts. For us humans. For what I learned though while doing this is, for the wildlife, for our furry feathered fin friends, they were like, awesome. We can we kind of have gotten a chance to reclaim the world of old that we knew for thousands, millions of years.
That loops into one of the chapters in the book that took place during the pandemic, when you're in Norway. Can you talk? I felt like that was a great example of how the silence benefited wildlife. Can you talk about that with your experience with the orcas? Yeah.
So I holed up, and then I started thinking about these experiences, and then I started kind of reflecting on a lot, and I realized that so much of my world had been visual, but so much had been auditory. My experience in the Grand Canyon had a lot of like elements of silence that I was like, that was the most profound. So then I started reading about how this was changing patterns in nature.
Yeah.
And I started hearing these reports that whales specifically, and orca, which are technically not whales even though they're called killer whales, they're not. They're the largest dolphin in the world.
I didn't know that until I heard you say that on your 1A interview, and I had no idea about that.
Yeah, so we don't know that much about them. But there was all this new behavior with whales up in Alaska, and then I heard about these people doing research up in Norway, and they were not singing louder. They were singing in different ways. One guy who's an expert, this guy Jacques DeVos, who's a free diving expert and spends time up there, he's like, yeah, they're talking more excitedly.
Okay.
They're having different conversations we haven't heard. And humpback whales were leaving their babies by the shore, and they were going off and fishing, something they had never seen. They were taking naps in the middle of shipping canals.
Wow.
Lanes where they're just lying on the surface, kind of, casually flipping their fins around. So I was like, this is something.
Yeah.
It was more than just hearing the birds that we were all hearing and people seeing coyotes in the streets of cities. This was like kind of cool. So I pitched it. Actually, Smithsonian was like, if you can get there and you can figure it out and do the quarantine game, we're on board. So I was like, great. So I went to the Arctic of Norway. During lockdown. I got permission. I had to quarantine, and I quarantined up on this place with a sauna. It was awesome.
Nice.
Just went on cold walks every day.
I love saunas.
Yeah. And then went up and met this guy, Jock, and went out on his boat, and then met some other folks, some friends, and another group doing kind of tours. And there's a tourism element up in Norway where you can go see orca and them feeding. And this was slightly different because there was only allowing 2 boats, kind of research based. And so we were able to get out. And this is, just to paint the scene, this is the Arctic Circle of Norway, at the very top of Norway. You're like looking out towards the North Pole, basically.
Yeah, sure.
Svalbard. And it's late November. It's the polar night, so the sun never comes over the surface.
How is that?
No, never comes over the horizon.
Crazy?
So it's crazy. So you get from like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., you get like a sunset kind of glow, that kind of purplish, turquoise,
sure,
amber, and that's the only light you get.
That I've done the reverse in Alaska in summer, and that was disorienting, but I couldn't imagine the nighttime.
So you feel tired a lot.
Sure.
And then on top of it, it's cold. It's that damp cold. It's like kind of freezing, and the water temperature is around 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And the idea is we're going to get in the water with the orca when they get relaxed and they start feeding on herring. Now herring is the largest population of fish. There's like schools of 1 billion.
Oh, wow.
And they all come and they migrate to this part of Norway during certain times of like early winter.
Yep.
And the orca and the humpback follow, and the orca use sound as their sight. So the clicks and the pops and the whistles, they communicate with each other. They can kind of see their white patches on their eyes as they hunt, but they use sonar too. And then they get in and they'll bait ball a pod of herring, and they'll swim around in a circle, push them to the surface, and the herring start release their fish bladders, and because they have to adjust for the change. So the water gets aerated. They call it like herring farts, and so the water's all bubbly. It's wild, and then they'll come around and they'll slash them with their tails and knock them unconscious, and then they'll go around and eat each herring individually, one at a time, casually.
And how big is a herring?
A herring's like 18 inches long, and this is like a 25-foot long orca with, razor-sharp teeth. And then they'll fillet it in their mouth and spit out the bones perfectly. It's like they're eating pistachios. It's totally amazing. And so we get in after like 5 days of having some experience, some encounters, nothing spectacular. I'm trying to take pictures. We get in the water, and there's definitely a lot of activity. We're way out, very tip of the north, like the land is almost gone. We're almost looking just open ocean. And suddenly I see this fin coming towards me, this like 6-foot fin. I'm like, no way. That's a male. And your heart's racing. There's never been a violent encounter with orca in the wild with human beings, just in captivity.
Just a big mammal like that?
Just a big mammal with sharp teeth that eats they eat the livers out of great whites, kind of for sport. They eat seals off the shore. And they eat, herring like pistachios. So wide range of hunting habits, dietary habits. And I grab a big breath, and I've got this giant thick wetsuit on. I feel kind of like, a buoy. I've got this 8 mil closed cell wetsuit. I have no oxygen. I'm just holding my breath. I dive down with my camera, and here comes this male orca right in front of me, 25 feet long. He's probably 8 tons.
Yeah.
And he swims, we have eye contact, and he looks right at me, and he goes right in front of me, and my lungs are about to burst, so I'm trying to get a picture, and then it happens, and then I feel this in my chest, this sudden, like, I don't know how to make this sound with the mic, but this sudden boom, and there's no sound. It's the rock concert in my chest.
Yeah.
And my heart's like, boom. And I'm like, what the hell? And I go to the surface, and I'm like, whoa, what was that? And he pulsed me with sonar to be like, who is in my hunting waters up here? And it was like, it didn't feel territorial. It felt like, kind of like, I'm just checking you out.
Hey, what's up?
What's up? It's kind of orca high five. Who are you? Okay. And then after he did that, I'm swimming along on my camera. He comes back and he swims up right next to me, and then he like lays over and he puts his pectoral fin. I kind of pull my knees up. His pectoral fin goes right under my fins. I'm at the surface. I'm like, whoa, buddy, whoa, that's getting a little tight.
Yeah.
And then he rolls and he spins and he puts his dorsal fin 6 feet long. It's taller than I am.
Yeah.
Right over the side of my head, and I have to move my head, but in like this graceful, ever so sweet like moment. And then somebody else in the water swims right up next to them and blows bubbles next to them. And then we sat there and watched them fish and trying to get pictures. There's no light. Cameras are like, can't focus. That part's challenging. And then a humpback, they kind of work together, but they're really competitors. They're like frenemies. They come in to basically take the orca's hard work, and they've got the bait ball. They just spooled up, and they come up from the bottom, and they swallow the big bait ball in one fell swoop. And I mean, it was spiritual on so many levels, but it made me realize there's this underwater orchestra, ballet of sounds going on, because the level of sound going on that I heard through the wetsuit hoodie even, but also through the mics we put underwater is so unbelievable, between the humpback and the orca and the whistles and the pops.
And you're kind of feeling it too.
And then I felt one
going into you.
Yeah. And so it just made me realize there's a layer of communication on this planet that we've sort of forgotten about, and we've made it so noisy with all our mechanical conveniences.
Sure. I remember in our first conversation, it was like you had finished it a while before, but your hike of the Grand Canyon and your book, I think that day we met, you had just gotten your first copy of your Grand Canyon book, which is an awesome book, by the way, if people haven't seen it. But I remember in that conversation, one of the things that clearly sticks out is you were talking about how quiet it was down there, and how you had the microphones would kind of screw up because they weren't used to registering that kind of quiet. And like, you'd be sitting on one side of the canyon and you'd hear like a bighorn sheep or something, bleat, and you think, oh man, there's a big bighorn sheep in the camp, and you look up and it'd be on the other side of the canyon. And so I remember kind of realizing that you were thinking you were zoned in on the sound thing. And so, I mean, how has that been as far as you've spent a lot of time with visual filmmaking, photography? I mean, has this kind of opened up a whole new way of thinking and processing and looking at things for you? Because I mean, I would imagine so, since you wrote a book about it, but how has that been as kind of a hard turn into another sense, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, initially it was, like I was saying, because of lockdown and all that, it was hard, and I was trying to felt like I was grabbing at straws. But once I got going, and I did this story on the orca, and then I started like reflecting on my experience in the Grand Canyon.
Yep.
And then I wrote a chapter about the difference between the Colorado River Delta without water, which is the current state. Sadly, it doesn't reach the ocean any longer. Mm-hmm. And then during 2013, I think it was, when they had a small pulse that they, organized with conservationists to release just a little pulse, 1% of the river's flow into the delta to try to restore it. Mm-hmm. And I took a paddleboard with some friends across that, long journey, and did a short documentary about it. But that was really hard. But it made me realize that so many of these stories, when I'm going to chase pictures, there's this other amazing layer of sound that is as important, if not more important, and if not more moving.
Yeah.
So if I come back from a trip, an assignment, say, or doing these things, I often say that, I have all these pictures to look at, and if I do my job, some of them are cool, beautiful. But the thing that kind of sits with me the most are those soundscapes that, kind of linger in the back of my head, that sonar pulse of the orca, the male, who's coincidentally, he's named Melvin by the researchers up there. They've ID'd him and recognized him, and he'd been caught in a fishing net. So he's been around humans for a while, so that's partly maybe why he was a little more frisky and playful. Whether it's that or hearing the kind of that symphonic kind of buzz in the Amazon, those sounds stick with me, or that just deep, profound kind of sublime silence in the Grand Canyon where you can almost hear your heartbeat in your eardrums.
Yeah.
And it's in filmmaking, sound, as they say, is as important, if not more, than the visuals. It's at least 50% of the film. So in that part of the world, I've been pretty used to it. But a lot of times that's music and
yeah.
So diving into this, the natural sounds is what this book's really about, and trying to showcase it and how fragile it is, the power of it, and for not just us but wildlife, and there's huge health benefits for it too. But the fragility and just how quickly we can change it and squash it.
Well, yeah, and how it's diminishing so fast, because there's, the book is obviously full of these beautiful photos, but you're a really, really good writer, and in a relatively small amount of words, I feel like you convey both entertainment and education. And there was a part in there where you were talking with a sound expert who has been looking for quiet. And could you talk a little bit about that, and how over the last, I guess, maybe 20 years, it's become kind of crazy how hard it is to find real quiet?
Yeah. So this guy's named Gordon Hempton, and there's a few guys out there that would do recordings of silence, of natural soundscapes.
Yeah.
Some people do it for films, Hollywood films, documentary films, or just to see where we are in the natural world. And this guy, Gordon Hempton, went out in the 80s in the north of Seattle.
Okay.
And he went to a bunch of different locations, and he put out microphones. And he calculated that in these wilderness areas, I can't remember how many he set up, that the longest period of silence, which became the definition of wilderness, was 15 minutes of uninterrupted natural sound. So that was the definition of silence. He went back in the early 2000s to all these locations, and not one location had periods of silence uninterrupted for longer than 5 minutes.
That's crazy.
And now I'm sort of become a geek about it. I walk around, I have these apps on my phone for measuring, sound and decibels.
Sure.
We're probably just chatting here, we're probably around 45. The quietest I've ever measured in the Grand Canyon was like 21. A jet is around 120.
Got it.
I think a rock concert or right next to a jet would go over that. But across the United States during daylight hours, they say that it's hard to find periods of uninterrupted sound for longer than 5 minutes. And even at night, I've been in wilderness areas not far from where we're sitting, at the Maroon Bells, where you and I have hiked around. Yeah. And I've sat out there and measured it from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. and done photographic merges to show what, the collective impact of traffic looks like, taking a picture every 10 minutes or so, and then sewing it together with Photoshop to show what, one night looks like of traffic, and the sky looks like a meteor storm. So the jet travel at night is something we hear, and you think, oh, well, jets are way up there, we don't really hear them. But in wilderness areas, you hear them really well. And I think the interesting thing is not just us. Sure, you can say, like, Pete, you're getting a little sensitive as you get older.
Crotchety.
Yeah, you're turning into that guy. But it's wildlife. So wildlife their survival depends on sound.
Mm-hmm.
So many of these species hear way better than they see.
Yep.
So frogs, for instance, they work together, and when they're all croaking, they create kind of this force field of croaks, and the predators can't figure out where the frogs are. So it's like rah, 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 rah. And it's really just confusing. So they're not getting picked off by birds or owls. But if a jet flies over, they all go quiet. And then they're like, boom. And then to start up their force field of croaking, it takes them a few minutes. So one guy's like, I'll go, and then you go, and then row, row, row. And then it takes a while before you get that rah, 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 rah. And that's where they get picked off. And so if a jet's coming over every 5 minutes, they never get the force field up.
Wow.
And that's just one example. Another I find really cool example is there's a lot of species that hear at levels that we can't. So elephants actually have this ability to set out a rumble that we can't hear. It's like 20 megahertz or something that they actually pick up through the soles of their feet and their trunks, and they can communicate up to 8 miles away. But if you put a bunch of roads in between where they're trying to communicate, wildlife corridors, and they're like, hey, we have grass here, water here, or come this way, it interrupts it and they can't hear it. Same with whales, actually. So the humpbacks, they say, used to communicate from the coast of California to the coast of Japan.
Really?
And so when they do that, that's like sending out an entire radio spectrum. And if you're at 20 miles away or 200 miles away, the different sound levels travel different distances at different depths.
Yeah.
So you tune back in and like, I hear you at, 95.5 or 101.7, and you send back that radio wave signal, and that's how they communicate. Or used to, before we started, filling the ocean up with engines on the surface and submarines doing, sonar blast and so forth, and seismic activity looking for oil.
One of the cool things about your book is, I recently read it a few weeks ago, and it's one of those things where it's made me so much more aware of all this, of noise, human powered noise, that I normally just took, like, it was just there. It's like they say, a fish is the last one to know they're in water. And I get annoyed with sirens and that kind of stuff. But now, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but now I'm like, God, the noise is everywhere. Like last night I was camping out and I was reading reviewing some of my notes from your book. And I was, basically at the bottom of Independence Pass, kind of quieting the roads there. But I woke up a few times in the middle of the night and I could hear planes or I could hear a car going by, and I was so zoned. So you might have made me more crotchety because now I'm paying attention.
Yeah, I've turned you into an old man.
I read a book just before I read yours called The End of Night, and it's about light pollution and how light pollution is bad for wildlife, for humans. And then I read your book right after. So now I'm kind of like super crotchety in all senses.
They're cousins, right?
They are.
They're totally connected.
And they're everywhere. I mean, you cannot escape light, man-made light. I guess it's a little easier to escape man-made light than man-made noise, but still is wild when you pay attention.
There's a picture, like I was just mentioning, of maroon bells where I merged it all together from 1 to 4 a.m. And it, the light's streaking with jets going all different directions. I could barely find a single photo without a jet.
Really?
And so you add that up, and then you add up, the municipal city lights, and we're losing, our night sky, which is something we as humans and creatures all over this planet have gazed upon for thousands, millions of years. And they were like, oh, whatever.
Just taking it away.
Just take it away. Like I've met kids. I went on this trip to document, this is not in the book, but I found it really interesting. These were nonviolent juvenile offenders out of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And it was incorporating outdoor kind of camping skills, the outdoor classroom, as a way to kind of bring them back.
Sure.
Rehabilitate, whatever word, I can't remember what they were using, but these were kids that had grown up in really tough situations in D.C. and kind of trying to get out of the gang world, and these counselors brought them out there, and they came in as really, really angry, young adults, bitter with the world for good reason.
Yeah.
And in just 3 days of being out on the San Juan River, and they eventually warmed up to me, let me take pictures. I was Mr. Photographer. And,
Yeah.
And one night I was like, you see that guy? That's the Milky Way. And every single one was like, what are you talking about? What's that?
Yeah.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. And then they, of course, they were scared to death of everything, rightfully so, because it was all so new.
Brand new.
And then, by day 4, a bunch of them were, some weren't great swimmers and they were getting better, and they were suddenly turned into kids again.
So cool, man.
And they were jumping off cliffs and laughing, and, their hard urban edge had washed away. And it was a unique trip, but I think it shows what these, the power of these places can do for us. And I think silence, not listening to cars and sirens all the time, they've actually done the scientific study on it, how beneficial it is, not just for sleeping, which is obvious, insomnia, but for heart disease.
I believe it.
Early dementia, early Alzheimer's, all kinds of stresses on the system. And they're saying that silence is like one of the greatest kind of signs of early cures for a lot of this.
There was a time where I lived next to a construction site for maybe like 3 or 4 weeks, and I really thought I was losing my mind. It was in Costa Rica, so there was no windows. It was just screen going straight into this construction site, and I really thought I was going crazy. And then I read Florence Williams' book, The Nature Fix, and she talks about how noise really can make you nuts, man-made noise after a while. And she also talks about all the stuff you said with the, how nature is really the best cure for everything.
Yeah.
It was the kind of thing where, similar with your book and with the one I read about night, like I kind of knew that stuff, but then you give me evidence to be like, yeah, I was right all along. So again, crotchety old man, thank you.
I mean, it's kind of, it's like an onion. There's layers. Once you dig into one, you're like, oh wow, there's a lot of layers to this. And I never really thought about this, but one reason I started thinking about this, but it didn't really gel until that flight from Chicago as the only passenger. Is that whenever I gave a talk, so I do a lot of talks around my work, and I was doing talks for my Grand Canyon project, and I talked to as wide a range of audiences I can. Mm-hmm. Some are not coming from the same mindset or love the outdoors as much as I do, and I love doing those talks as much as any, because I think those audiences need to hear like why conservation is important. And whenever I do those more conservative, very challenging talks with people that maybe will never go to the Grand Canyon or sort of like, why? Yeah. Whenever I brought up silence, it was the one thing that everyone related to.
Interesting.
And, because I think we all have some sort of, connection to it, or whether it's historical or whether no matter what you do, whether you fish, you hunt, you like going on fancy glamping trips or sufferfests, there's always some element of silence woven into these things. And I think as a kid, or historically we used to have that as a kid. Now we're kind of showered with screens and games and all that. But I think there's a layer that we can connect on. And so in some ways it's like the back door to talking about conservation.
That's a good point. In your NPR 1A interview, I was listening to it, and you mentioned, I never thought about this, that every single religion has a reverence for silence. You can't find one where silence is not an important part. I never thought about that, but
I hadn't either, and it makes you think about it. And we now treat a lot of these national parks like backdrops for entertainment.
Oh, sure.
And so how can we kind of shift the model to think of them more as a place of reverence, just an open-aired version? You wouldn't walk in with your Bluetooth boombox into the Sistine Chapel and just be like, what's up? Just going to roll some tunes in here. Mm-hmm. But we do that. Now that seems to be kind of the cool thing to do if you're going on a hike is, rock your tunes on the back of your backpack.
I don't get that, man.
I don't get that either.
Like, I really, sometimes I say that and I really don't understand how somebody could think that's appropriate. Like generally I try to be like, oh, well, everybody's doing their own thing. But I run into it every time I'm running on the trail, somebody blaring Bluetooth speakers.
Yeah.
And what reality are they in where that's appropriate? I'm sorry if that comes off being a jerk, but it's like, I don't get it.
No, I mean, I'm on the same page. Like if you're going to go out, be respectful of others and, you're not going to like, hawk loogies on them.
Yeah.
Your noise pollution is kind of the equivalence.
Sure.
And who says just because I'm hip and I like these tunes and I like to rock out, why do you need to hear it when you're on the trail with me?
One thing that I really liked about your book, and I'd heard you talk about it before in various times, but is the responsibility you have to not blow these places up, because you got a big following, you're publishing books, you got 1 million followers on Instagram, whatever. And you could, in theory, post a picture and the place could be overrun by people who just, it could be somebody like me, like, hey, man, that looks cool. Look where Pete was. I want to go there. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the responsibility you feel as a, I don't know what, I hate the word influencer, but you do have influence. So how do you deal with that?
Well, it's something I think about all the time, because I want to highlight the beauty of these places and the magic of them and share. And, but I want to respect them. And I also want to respect the journey of finding it on your own. Mm-hmm. And I think that this instant gratification world that we live in, where everything's a touch of, a screen away or finger away, that takes the part of the fun out of it. So this book, intentionally, the captions are informative, but totally vague on their location.
Nice. And
that's because we've seen it happen over and over. Everyone's like, "Yo, where is that? I got to go do that." And then they'll go do their selfie picture with their outfit. And we've seen it over and over. And a lot of these places, I go to the same places that plenty of these influencers go to, and everyone mobs up with, their same outfits, and they're hipper than the next. And then I'll sit and wait. And I don't even bring my cameras out. And then they all leave. They all take kind of the exact same shot. And then I'll usually sit around and let it get quiet again. And then I'll maybe chase a totally different shot with maybe stars or something. And there's quite a few examples of that in this book. So I think I don't know how to change it. That's the power of our addictive nature as humans. These screens and phones and algorithms are feeding into that. And I'd say it's 50-50 on if the good outweighs the bad.
Yeah.
It's a big question. And I think it's, there's a lot of mental health stuff that's going with it, and that stress of everyone thinking they're their own magazine. And so I question it all. I try to engage with my audience, and I try to be mindful about it, but I don't try to let it run my life. And then I respect the places I shoot in, and and the people, of course, and try to do it in a way that's not, just giving a roadmap to come trump where I did. Because what's the fun of that too? Like,
yeah, there's none.
I love getting images in places that are striking and beautiful and, quiet and that are different.
Yeah.
I don't want to just go put my lens in the exact same spot, or as they say, the tripod holes of someone before me.
When the busting your ass part is what makes it all so much richer. If you have to bust your ass to get up there, like it's, say you get 2 or 3 images you can use, but in a way that's not even the point.
The journey. I mean, this sounds, again, I'm going down the old man path.
I'm gonna name this Ed and Pete, 2 official old men.
But the journey on half this stuff is really the beauty. And there's often people ask me, "Do you ever not take a picture?" And there are plenty of times I decidedly don't take a picture because I just love being in the moment. Mm-hmm. And there's working to get to a place and not just driving and walking over to the side of the road and taking the exact same picture that 1,000 other people took. Mm-hmm. Working to get something new and unique, and sweating and focusing. The benefit there is that for me, and I think for others, is that you're setting out to do a task, and you're being mindful, and you're putting your energy into like one thing. Mm-hmm. And you're pushing back that distracted scatterbrain world that we now live in. And you're like pushing away the noise, like mentally, to go take the picture. And I think it's sort of a meditation in a way, and in its own right.
This may be a weird question. I'll cut it if you want to answer it. But like, how have you managed to keep on the path, not get too full of yourself, not like, because I would think, you've had success in this photography business for a long time. And with that comes a lot of attention. And I think we've all seen people that when they start getting attention, I think attention is probably even more potent than money. They can kind of lose themselves. But I noticed in your acknowledgments in your book, Seeing Silence, that you thanked your brother and sister for keeping you straight and keeping you in check. And so I was wondering, and again, we can cut a few, but like, and when you look around your house here, you've done all this cool shit all over the world, and the vast majority of these photos are of your family. So is your family kind of are they the ones that kind of keep you straight? Keep that ego in check, or what?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Do they work very hard to do that?
They beat me up left and right, and as they should. And I think our family, a hard time is a way we show affection. Mm-hmm. So if you're not getting a hard time, then maybe you're not loved as much. No, it's, in all seriousness, you're nice to say that. I've been lucky to even make a career with a camera, because I started out, with a dream and struggled for a long time and made very little money and clawed my way into National Geographic. And then I sold a story and thought, all right, I'm easy street. And then I quickly learned that you're only as good as your last image. Mm-hmm. And that holds true today. You're only as good as your last film or story, and it never gets easy. And I think as a result, there's an element of that kind of breeds insecurity. If you're not constantly creating and producing new good stuff, I think painters and artists, they can weigh on you, and it's so that keeps your ego in check straight.
Yeah.
Because it never, at least for me, it's never been easy. It's always hard work, and I'm lucky if I take like 5 good portfolio shots a year, maybe only 3.
Wow.
And there's a lot of fatigue that comes with the visual game, and they say that the same part of your brain that runs creativity also runs your mood. So it's pretty obvious why a lot of artists have mental health challenges.
Sure.
Ups and downs and stuff, and you're always trying to reinvent the wheel for yourself, and it's so that I would say that definitely keeps it in check. And sure, there's this social media game with these algorithms that is a love-hate.
Yeah. And
it gives you a voice that you maybe larger than I had before it existed, when I was just working for the outlet of magazines, print media. But I wouldn't say that it's made it any easier. I'd say it's almost made it harder.
Yeah, it's more stuff to balance.
Yeah, and it's and I think it's how to get a message out today is really tricky.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like maybe podcasts are the only way you can have a long conversation like this.
You should start a podcast. I was thinking about that when I was driving up. I was like, Pete put me out of business though. But so many cool people. That's another thing. Like your family, obviously I had the pleasure of meeting your folks in Santa Fe that time. And your dad, man, he's a character, and what a badass. But then your friends, I've only met him once that time with Kevin Fedarko, but it just seems like you surround yourself with really good people as well. I think I think that's important. It is. And they won't tolerate nonsense. No, I know that. Speak from experience.
I mean, it. I think that, but back to my family, I think, they dish it back, but they're that's, at the end of the day, you're, as an individual, you're kind of a dry stick, that's easy to crack. But as a family, you're kind of like a bundle, and it's really hard to break.
Yeah.
And so family is incredibly important. And I have huge respect and love and appreciation for them. And I'm grateful they put up with me. And And I'm sure I could do a trillion things better. But I guess the goal is to just keep falling on your face as long as you get back up and try again.
We were talking before we started recording. I did an episode with Rick Ridgway, the mountaineer, and part of his new book is how he kind of went from doing adventure for adventure's sake to trying to use these adventures to push forward a cause, some sort of cause that was important to him, a lot of conservation type causes. And I think you're a perfect example of somebody that's done that in the filmmaking and photography world. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you've recently been doing. I know you were on the Yampa River for a while, and then I think you were just at Lake Powell. We were texting about it when we were trying to schedule this. What's the state of water in the West? I mean, I know, what are you seeing out there? We're a few feet from the headwaters of the Colorado. I mean, what are you thinking?
Well, just to connect to Rick was kind of like a mentor on that front.
Oh, was he really?
Watching him, how he crafted that. And he distantly, but he was always super supportive and amazing. And he talks in his book about kind of seeing his first National Geographic and wanting to be part of it. And then there he is, on the cover. And he lost a dear friend of his in an avalanche, who was a dear friend of our family and photographed our family as kids.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so his name's Jonathan Wright, and he died on assignment. I think it was for National Geographic in an avalanche, and he lived here in this valley, and I remember seeing him before he went on that expedition,
Really?
and he was showing me his boots and everything, and so he indirectly kind of was, I remember him leaving, and I was like, I want to do that. I want to be like him. And so he inspired me to do what I do today. So there's a nice kind of backstory with that and Rick. And I feel a real kind of heart bond to Rick over that, even though I don't see him very much.
Good dude.
Yeah, he's a great guy. So I think my work, I'm always trying to weave some sort of adventure as the hook to tell a bigger story of natural resources or wherever. And I've focused on water for the last decade or so. And I just was down for Smithsonian doing a story on Lake Powell, and I would say also on Glen Canyon, and I'll explain. So Lake Powell is the second largest reservoir in the United States. It sits above the Grand Canyon. Below the Grand Canyon is Lake Mead. It's been in the news a lot with people finding bodies and so forth, and treasure down in Lake Mead. But Lake Powell was a place that few people visited, minus the native people who lived throughout it for centuries. But when they were proposed to dam it, there was a big controversy, and they called it the place no one knew, which is slightly inaccurate. But the general public didn't know really how amazing this place was.
Yep.
So we're in second decade of drought, which I would say we're well past calling it a drought. This is climate change.
Yeah.
It's the driest it's been in the southwest United States in 1,200 years, and they can measure that through tree ring studies and dating back thousands of years. So we're in a really dry period. If we didn't have modern technology and we were living like indigenous tribal communities back in the day, most people would have gotten up and moved at this point because they had no choice. People in places in New Mexico and Arizona, and I've had friends saying, "Yeah, our wells have run dry." We would have moved back in the day.
Sure.
Now, Lake Powell it's been kind of our bank account, Lake Mead too, on Western Water, and it's now down at 24% full. So the glass is a quarter full on this reservoir, and it's getting to a point where they're projecting next year there won't be enough water to actually run the turbines below the dam. And that's called power pool. And that gets really complicated because it gets any lower, then you can't even release water out of the dam, and we basically have just a quagmire above it. So it's getting very complicated. The Colorado River is the main river, filling it. It's 1,500 miles long, and the river doesn't reach the ocean anymore, so it's already dried up at the end, which is a foreshadow what's happening everywhere. And these reservoirs were kind of our 4-year bank accounts, and we've brought them down to where we basically don't have a bank account left. And so we're releasing water now in upper reservoirs like Flaming Gorge, releasing an extra 1 million acre feet to keep Lake Powell functioning as a reservoir. So that's the tricky part. That's kind of the bleak part. Now, the silver lining here when I was there is that you go up these canyons, and I used to go there as a kid. I learned to water ski there, and there's, this kind of amazing, weird, beautiful blue water lake in Red Rock Desert in the middle of nowhere. And you're like, what? and it's huge. Now you go up these canyons, and there's the bathtub ring, kind of this kind of whitish, kind of glazing on a lot of the rock, showing the water we once had. Mm-hmm. Or kind of a stark reminder, but a lot of it's washing away. And then you go up these slot canyons, and the lake vanishes, and I went walking, and I walked 50 miles with my friend Len Nessifer.
Yeah, he's great.
And this guy from Glen Canyon Institute, Eric, who's showing how this place is changing, but coming back to life.
Yeah.
And so we walked up these slot canyons and cathedrals that are been underwater my entire life. Mm-hmm. I've never known them. My dad went up them in the 60s before I was born, some of them, when they were just starting to flood the lake. And so I got to revisit some of these, and some of them are 5 times bigger than some of the most famous ones in the Grand Canyon.
Really?
It's just mind-boggling. And then you go up further kind of to the top of the bathtub ring, and there's things like a freshwater orchid. Didn't know that existed, but they're blooming everywhere, and beavers and wildlife are coming back. So this national, it's not a national park, but it easily could be. Mm-hmm. But this national treasure is sort of coming back and revealing itself. And, those that want to go wakeboarding and water skiing are bummed. But again, nature bats last. Like, this was never, even John Wesley Powell, who, the one-armed Civil War veteran who first down the Grand Canyon, they named the lake after him.
Yeah.
It's the last thing he wanted.
Oh, yeah.
He recommended the complete opposite.
Isn't that crazy?
And so he named a lake after him after he said, "Don't do this."
He would be so furious.
Yeah, he'd be rolling over in his grave. I'm sure he is. So this thing was never meant to last.
Yeah.
It was, it was hubris that built it back in the day. And I think, we're seeing that unfold now. And so it's going to get complicated. And I've always said that water will be the ultimate decider of how many people should live in an area in the Southwest. I mean, we can't sustain it unless, water may be free. The transportation of water is not. It's really expensive to figure out how to get water to places. So sure, you can live near a river, but to get it uphill to your house or thousands of miles in the middle of the desert,
yep,
which we currently do, is expensive, energy consumptive, and not efficient. And so I think it's foolhardy to think that we're going to, and people have proposed this, to, pipe water from the Great Lakes over the continental divide or drag icebergs from Antarctica up. Desalination is really expensive and energy intensive and not easy. That one, we may have some technology to be able to do it in places if you're near, the ocean,
yeah,
San Diego or something. But middle of the desert, can we keep growing at the rate we have been? Water's going to be the final say on that, and it's saying no right now.
Well, and that's why, yet another reason why your work is so important, because, up until today, this is my first podcast when this is my official job. But a few weeks ago, my main job was water rights. And the thing about water rights is it gets extremely boring extremely quickly. And when you hear these eggheads talking about it, or academics, and that's where your work is so important, because it gets it out of the masses. Like where I live in Colorado Springs, 80% of our drinking water comes from the Colorado River, and they're pumping it under the mountains. There's this big barn on top of the divide there, and it looks like a beautiful barn. It's a pumping station. And at some point, they're not if, but when they turn that faucet down, Colorado Springs is going to be in trouble, and I'm going to be in trouble. And everybody's just watering their grass, just nobody's paying attention. And that's not.
Yeah, so how many people in Colorado Springs knows that 80% comes from there?
I mean, I would say
5%?
Far less. No, I'd say less than 1%. There are 500,000 people there. Every person I've said it to, they look at me like I'm crazy when I say it.
Well, you are.
Something's off.
No, you're spot on. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I've been beating the water drum on this for over a decade.
Well, don't stop. All right, last thing. What is something you're optimistic about? You know, we got all this. We got climate change. We got social media, all the old man issues that are bothering us so much.
Noisy.
It's noisy. There's too much light. Make me feel good so I don't lose my mind on my drive home today. What are you optimistic about?
Optimism. Well, a couple quick thoughts. I just did a talk with Chris Tompkins, who's been instrumental in saving. She's saved more land, protected more land than I think anyone in history or currently alive down in South America. Mm-hmm. Setting up a slurry of new parks. I think 13 million acres she's helped protect.
So amazing. I'll link to articles and videos and stuff on her. So if people aren't familiar, you got to get familiar quick.
Yeah. And she used to be the CEO of Patagonia.
Yep.
And her late husband, started the North Face. So they were deep in the world of outdoor sports, and they realized they had to kind of pay their rent back to the planet. And so I did a talk with her, and everyone asked, well, do you have hope? And she's like, and I thought it was beautiful. She said, no, you have to earn hope. Hope isn't something you just say. It's, it's not just thoughts and prayers and move on. Hope, you got to go out and you build hope. And I think you can build hope by going out and doing something. And I would argue even more than just talking. I mean, awareness is critical, but we need to do hands-on stuff and try to figure out how to be thoughtful and save water. Can we figure out how to take agricultural, hay meadows and maybe let them go fallow for a few years to put water back in the river for fish, and pay the rancher money to do that so they're willing to, and start to revisit these systems. And these models exist actually, and are being used in this valley and beyond. So I think I'm hopeful when I see that people are starting to get out and do work. And I think, you think back, in the 80s, everyone smoked cigarettes on a plane, and it shifted quickly. And we're in this weird limbo where everything's politicized and people don't want to shift. But I think the next generation, the vast majority is, they're like, we got to do something. And I see them working to create hope. I'm hopeful about Glen Canyon, amazing canyon that I didn't know existed because it was underwater my whole life, to go back and see it and to see like nature returning in a beautiful way. And so I think if we can figure out, and I think in pockets we need to do more, that we're part of the system and not controlling it. That will give me hope. I also get hope because I think people talk about this a lot, but I'm starting to see it just come forward more. And that is that, indigenous communities, they've always had this belief that we're kind of the low rung on the totem pole of nature. We're not on the top. We need to learn from all the species, and their voice is starting to come back to tables in ways that I haven't seen when I was a kid.
Sure.
And I think they have a lot of wisdom and ability to help us. So I find some hope there, and keep going out and trying to do work on it and do stuff, and then try to enjoy it too. You got to bring some joy with it too, and go camp and have a sense.
Willing to work hard enough.
Yeah, and have a sense of humor about it. We're all gong show on a certain level. Nobody has the right answer.
I love that term. Gong show. Well, man, you do great work, man. I'm so glad that we met years ago. I love all your stuff, especially Seeing Silence. We got a new edition coming out soon that I'll be telling people about when it hits the stores. But it's inspiring stuff, man. It's inspiring, and inspiring is one thing, but your work, it creates action from people, even people like me. When I read your stuff, it spurs me to do more, which is the key. So I just appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me. And don't take me to the Colorado River again and make me surf on a big wave.
That was awesome. Thanks, Ed.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.